Hi, this is Elizabeth Dankoski, founder of the Dream School Project, a college consulting and mentoring program for high achieving high school students. Today, I want to do a very quick deep dive into the state of college admissions in the midst of COVID. There is so much that's been changing, and I think it's so important for parents and students to know what is actually happening right now and how can you navigate these changes so you can truly thrive for all the way through high school and into college and beyond. I'm going to take a moment to share a few slides with you. So here we are focusing in on how we can thrive in COVID college admissions without the usual stress and overwhelm. That is a key piece of what we do here at the Dream School Project. I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into this field. Back when I was at Wellesley College, I went into a writing program where I was one of the top writing scholars. And I had my first student outside of Wellesley. And by the time I was graduated from college, I had this huge roster of students where I was helping them with SAT prep, writing tutoring, and eventually I had my master's in creative nonfiction writing. And that was a very natural move to start helping students with college admissions essays. And I loved the entire process of that. Eventually, I went on to create the Dream School Project. I'll tell you a little bit about how that happened in a moment, but all of my students have gotten into extraordinary schools. What we've been able to see is that they've been accepted into Harvard, MIT, Columbia, Penn, Dartmouth, all of the Ivy League schools, and all of the other top schools in the nation. It's been really extraordinary to see how students have thrived in this process. 100% of the students that we've worked with have been accepted into the top 40 schools. 75% of rising seniors have been accepted into the top 20 schools. So let me tell you just a little bit more about the real backstory to this. So about 10, 12 years ago, I had this huge class of students, about 18 different students who were all applying to the top schools. They all had amazing grades and test scores and high level extracurriculars, everything everyone said that they needed. And what ended up happening was that when the results came out from their admissions process in the spring, only 2 of the students that I was working with got into the really top schools. Now, I was self-taught. I entered this whole arena through college, thought I understood what I needed to know, had read some books and talked to some people. And all the advice was top grades, top test scores, high level extracurriculars, awards, captains of this team, head of this club or start a club, etc. Right? So I was dispensing the very same advice. So when all of these students ended up getting into really good schools, but not necessarily the very top schools, I couldn't at first figure out what was the difference between the students who had gotten in and the students who had gotten, most of them, waitlisted, not rejected, but just are rather deferred for their regular decision or rather early decision applications. Many of them had just simply been deferred and sent to the regular decision pile. When the results came out in the spring, many of those students ended up getting waitlisted at their top choice schools rather than simply rejected. And I was really curious what was going on with this. What I started to realize was that the students who had created something of their own that really showcased their unique interest and served their communities in a meaningful way, those were the students who were getting yeses at these very top schools. So I started to look at this very closely because I was also very concerned about the mental health of my students. They were coming to me just so stressed and exhausted, getting 5 hours of sleep a night, trying to do everything everyone said that they needed, and worried that they still weren't, it wasn't going to be enough, right? So I was concerned about their mental well-being. I was looking at how this wasn't working in terms of, doing all the quote right things. It still wasn't enough. And realizing as I looked into this more that a waitlist status at that point was simply a polite way of the school saying, yes, you have everything we said you're supposed to have, but it's not enough. You don't have anything that truly distinguishes you. So After that, I decided, all right, I've got to teach students to do exactly what these students have done. And that's what I set out to do with the Dream School project. So that's what we ended up creating together, my team and I. It's been extraordinary to see what students have created in a separate video. If you'd like to learn more about what current students are doing and what some of my previous students are doing, we can take a look at that. For today, let's get really focused on what's happening with COVID admissions and how you can navigate all of this. So here we are, almost 2 years into this pandemic. And what we're seeing is that this past application season, the number of applications has continued to rocket. It was up by 22% this year. And what's interesting is that when you break down that 22%, what we're seeing is that 2% really of the population is driving that 22% increase. So it's not necessarily that there's 22% more students applying, it's that there are 22% more applications coming through the students who are applying to all of these top schools. The other thing to note is that the vast majority of these 22% come from affluent communities, students who have resources, families who are able to pay for top tier college advising as well as top tier college tuition. So this is a very important piece for us to notice, because of course, as the applications continue to rocket, and what ends up happening is that, let me go back one screen, is that admissions, of course, are going, the rate of admissions is going down. We've seen a massive increase in the numbers of applications that are happening in the last 6 years. These are some really interesting statistics for us to notice. The number of applications that Brown has received in the last 6 years is 62%. That goes all the way up to 92% at Columbia. So we're seeing an increased focus on top tier admissions. And of course, what's happening is that acceptance rates, according to the number of applications being submitted, are going down. Why is this increase in happening? Well, right now, the big piece that's happening in the last couple of years are the test optional policies. We're going to talk more about that in a second. What does it actually mean to be test optional? Of course, students have been spending more time at home, particularly last year when they were home in this pandemic. There was a lot more need for, having more options, right? So when the results came out, they didn't know, would we still be in a lockdown, or would we have more ability to move around? How did students want to choose where they wanted to be? Most of them wanted to be closer to family, right? So that was part of it. And it was also the uncertainty of this whole time. Well, if we're through this pandemic, I still want the options to be able to go to the West Coast if I'm in the East Coast, for example. The other piece is that there has been a historically low increase in tuition this past year, and very strong financial aid, particularly centered around COVID financial aid. And of course, it's so easy to apply to multiple schools with the Common Application. That has been true for a number of years. But what's happening is that as students feel less pressure to submit their testing, it's all in one place in the Common App for the vast majority of these top tier schools. And so more and more students are applying almost without a second thought. So we talked about, as the number of applications increases, acceptance rates decrease, and so does the amount of time spent reading an application. I read an op-ed article recently from the former dean of admissions at Penn, and she said that she used to be instructed to take no more than 20 minutes to read for an initial read of an application. She always took more time. But what's happening now in the current state of admissions, with the vast thousands and thousands numbers of applications being put in front of these admissions officers, they're being told literally they have 4 minutes for an initial read. This is why it is so important for us to help you know exactly how to grab their attention in 4 minutes. Yes, they'll take a deeper look after the 4 minutes if you get through that initial hoop, but we've got to make sure that in those 4 minutes, we've got everything taken care of. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's talk first about this test optional piece. So a lot of students have just assumed, oh, if it's test optional, that means I really don't need to submit tests. Now let's look at what's happening in the top tier admissions. That's actually not true. The vast majority of very top tier schools are accepting only about 10% of their applicants without any test. The rest of the applicants, 90% of them, typically have very strong test scores. When you should not submit a test score to a test optional school is when you are nowhere near in range of the average SAT score for that school. So let's say the average, SAT score is a 1490 and your student is scoring somewhere around a 1300 or below, you're not going to submit your test options our test results at that point, because that's going to hurt your admissions process. But if you are in range, absolutely go ahead and submit them. It's still considered pretty much a requirement, even if they say it's test optional. There are a couple of schools that have done this very differently. For example, Northeastern, they accepted 53% of students without test scores last year. Wellesley, I think, accepted somewhere around 30% of students without test scores. So we are seeing that this can absolutely happen, but those are usually more in the upper tier, not the top tier. Let me take you through just a couple more pieces that's important to know. The other piece around test scores is that they are the average SAT test score or ACT test score is going up. Last year, Boston College saw a 100-point increase in their average SAT. So Boston College, which used to be a target, even a safety school for my students 10, 12 years ago, is now moving slowly, quickly up towards the top tier admissions category. So we just want to notice these things. These are important because they're important in helping you decide what is the right school for my student if they're not a great test taker, and what risk am I willing to take if I don't have the right test scores that I want. Do I want to go through all the admissions efforts to apply to a school that I know is going to really want to see my test scores and I don't have them? Or do I want to focus more on schools that are slightly underneath that very top category and focus more on schools that really are a good match for me or for my student? The other piece to look at is that early decision rates are changing significantly. They still are higher typically than the regular decision application, but we can see here that in the past, so we go from class of 2018 all the way up to the class of 2025, we can see that those numbers have been going up in terms of acceptance rates, and now they're coming back down. And all of the numbers we can see here, some of them are not reported, like Stanford, they're not reporting any longer. Some other schools are refusing to report numbers like this any longer, but the schools that are, we can see that all of them are lower than they were a number of years ago. So acceptance rates for early decision, it becomes even more important as they're going down to choose the right school. This is why you must work with an experienced college admissions expert to help you find the right list of schools, as well as choosing the right school for early decision and early action, because it can make or break the early decisions process. Of course, you want to make sure that you are well matched for that early school. So the other piece that we want to talk about is how so much of the focus on admissions right now is that we are living in an era of innovation, both inside and outside the classroom. So let me tell you a little bit about what college admissions officers are looking for. The basic idea is that when a student is really interested in a particular area, let's say it's coding, we want to make sure that that student goes deep into that interest and shows a sustained interest in that area over the course of 3, even 4 years. So that means pretty early on in high school, the student has to identify what he or she is interested in and how to carry that through all the way into the admissions process. That said, what colleges are looking for is not straight coding or straight biology or straight one focus. They're very much looking for an interdisciplinary, humanities driven focus. So for example, two of my students right now are very interested in programming. They're also very passionate about mental health. What they are currently doing is building an app for an organization that works with mental health patients who have recently come out of the incarceration system or are trying to avoid it. And they're creating an app to help with the scheduling, because it's a very sophisticated, complicated scheduling process that this nonprofit needs. So they're demonstrating their interest in coding, but also in their interest in the social impact of how they use that coding. This is a hugely important piece, and we're seeing this over and over again in admissions, that this is what they truly want students to be focused on. I want to mention a couple of other things about the academic component. So it's really important for us to remember that obviously top grades and test scores are, need to be as strong as possible. But the other piece to remember is that APs are very important. If your school doesn't offer them, self-study them. If your school does offer them and you're trying to go to a very top school, you need 8 to 12 total APs. That's the sweet spot for elite colleges. So keep that in mind. The other thing is that I wanted to take you through how this era of innovation inside and outside the classroom, this is very much reflecting our job market. I want to tell you a few examples about this. We're going to talk about leadership in just a moment. What is it truly? And it's all connected to what I'm about to share with you. So the first thing to notice is that admissions are reflecting what's happening in our economy. There's a profound impact on retail jobs. You can see this is an example. This is an image of an Amazon store where there are no cashiers. You just scan your phone in when you go in, and you scan it when you go out. And this is exactly what we're seeing. This kind of innovation is being reflected in what admissions officers are talking about over and over and over again. We're hearing the words creativity, creative problem solving, innovation. These are the words that admissions officers are using and about what they're looking for. And it's exactly what's happening in our economy. Let's look at a couple of examples about how this is happening. This is a picture of a factory that went from 500 workers to 5 in a very short period of time, because now robots are doing all the labor of what those individuals were doing before. So whatever can be automated will be automated, is in process of being automated. And that means that what's left is that whatever cannot be automated is creativity, is innovation. These are the skills that students must develop today, because the old way of just kind of getting to be an expert at whatever their particular interest is and staying in their lanes and not connecting it to any kind of larger social impact or a larger creative, innovative process, it's no longer relevant. It's just not what's happening in our economy. Let's look at another example. So this isn't happening just in low wage jobs like in the retail sector. This is also happening in higher tech industries. So for example, this is a picture of a tumor on the left-hand side, where Google AI can now identify a tumor's mutations. It used to be, of course, that the doctor had to look at this very closely. That took time. It took his expertise. Now a computer can do it so much faster and free up the doctor so that the doctor can focus on the interaction with the patient. In addition, we're seeing things like in this example, somebody, you can see on the whiteboard back there, somebody is sketching out a wireframe for a website. And what's happening is that there's a camera, we can't see it very well in this image, but there's a camera watching at the same time that is translating what this man is drawing into code. Can you see that? So what we're seeing is that so much of what we thought we needed to know, like coding skills, like technology skills, these hard skills, these are now more and more being transferred over to robots, to computers. And therefore, what's needed is the creativity behind how we tell those computers what to do with this information. And that's why students must learn to bridge these hard skills with the now essential skills of creative problem solving. So that's what we're focused on here at the Dream School project. I'll stop sharing. And if you have any particular questions about how your student is doing in the admissions process and what students really need in order to truly thrive and truly stand out, please reach out to us. We are going to be having a live Q&A in just a couple of weeks, and we will continue those Q&As ongoing so that you have exactly what you need. You know the resources that are most helpful to your student, and you have a very clear sense of how to move through this process and find the very best schools for your student. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you on our Q&As, and feel free to email me anytime. You will be able to see it in the comments below the video and in the emails that I'll be sending out as well. I wish you well, and I wish your student the very, very best as they walk through this whole admissions process.